With threats to our nation waiting around every corner, adaptability is more important than ever. When conditions change without notice, quick strategic thinking is crucial. And with obstacles consistently impending, determination is essential in overcoming them. It's this willingness, decisiveness, and resilience that sets Marines apart. With our fighting spirit, we don't just fight battles, we win them. Marines are the constant our nation counts on to fight the unknown. And through adaptable problem solving, we do just that. Learn more at marines.com.
It's only a kick, a jump, a block. It's only a serve. It's only a tackle, a run. It's only for the fans. After all, it's only pressure. You got this. Adidas.
Survivor 46 is here, and so is On Fire, the only official Survivor podcast, and we have a twist this season. The winner of Survivor 45, Dee Valladares, will be joining us every week.
We're going behind the scenes of the biggest moments, the how and the why things happen, and the strategy and analysis you can only get from someone like me, a Survivor winner.
Listen to On Fire, the official Survivor podcast, wherever you get your podcast.
Never let it be said we don't do what we say we do. We talk anything but footy on this podcast and on this channel. And so, when an email dropped into our inbox at the end of last year, with details of Scotland's winning sports governing body of the year, we thought we'd find out more. I'm Michael.
And I'm John, and this is Great British Bosses, the behind-the-scenes conversation of British sport. And I'll be honest, like Michael, I know pretty much diddly squat about this Olympic sport, but it's the second biggest sport in Germany, and it's the reason why the outstanding copper box at Queen Elizabeth Olympic Park was built.
My name is Ewan Hunter. I'm the CEO of the Scottish Handball Association.
Hi, my name is Julia Stenhouse, and I'm the Operations Manager at the Scottish Handball Association.
Ewan, Julia, it's great to have you both on Great British Bosses. First of all, congratulations on the award. 7th of December was the big date, the Scottish Sports Awards, the big event. Ewan, what does that mean to you?
Thank you. The award itself, I think, is a recognition of a huge team effort on behalf of everybody involved in Scottish handball. I know it's a trope well used across sports and other kind of award ceremonies, but in this case, I don't think it could be any truer. Because it really is recognition of all the hard work from a really small but dedicated team of people, not least of which, Julia, who's joining me today, because we got that award when the team was 2.5 in size. We have recently doubled now to 4.5. So we are, we're on a growth trajectory. But we're still tiny. However, we do rely heavily on that network of volunteers and others who give so much. So what the award has done for us is really supercharge that visibility of handball. It's fantastic, wonderful, enormous sport in many, many parts of the world. And we are anxious to do our bit to create more of that here.
And Julia, I'll bring you into the conversation. What is it then that a governing body actually does? Because we hear about NGBs and governing bodies, and we know that there's this myriad maelstrom of organisations that run sport in this country. So what is it you actually do as a governing body?
That is a good question, Michael. I think the question should be, what we don't do, I think. But yeah, we kind of run in terms of the sort of organisation of everything to do with the kind of governance, organisation of leagues, competitions, membership, and we kind of have a strand that we look at kind of our digital media strategy, trying to push the visibility of handball. So I think we're the people that keep everybody else in line, I think, is maybe how our volunteers and players would see us. But we see ourselves more as a kind of a springboard for everyone else in the sport.
And Julia, you've been targeting young people right across Scotland. I think you've trained more than 600 coaches. How many people play handball? And these numbers sound quite large to me.
Yeah. So in terms of our playing membership, we have about 400 to 500 playing members, including youth and adult members. Recreationally, there will be more, but those numbers are within the kind of after-school clubs and recreational clubs across Scotland. But yeah, so we've kind of been on a bit of a mission to make the majority of schools in Scotland aware and facilitate them with the skills to be able to take handball sessions, whether it's their sports leaders or their PE staff, and giving them the skills to be able to deliver handball as a kind of introductory sport, and potentially one for the kind of curriculum within their PE courses. So yeah, I think in terms of our calendar year 2022, we'll have reached 1,000 sort of staff / sports leaders / participants within the introductory coaching course that we offer currently free of charge. So yeah, we're really getting into the roots of the school system, and that's what we're kind of aiming our growth to stem from.
And Ewan, obviously now coming in as CEO, in some ways, do you think COVID has been a bit of a kind of cut-off point? It's a place where we could restart and actually everything ground to a halt. But actually now you can go and approach these schools and say, well, actually, here's a sport that you might want to get involved in. And it's really kickstarting something new.
I think that's a really good point, John. We've certainly taken a very positive approach to that opportunity. When I was at the World Championship finals there just at the weekend in Stockholm, we were inside the Tele2 Arena in Stockholm, 23,000 people in there watching handball at the highest level. Denmark beat France in the final. It's a hugely strong sport across Europe, but what you've got is fiercely competitive sport on the court. We are a contact sport. So, there's no shying away from that. This is a physical game, but at the same time, it's a really good, strong family atmosphere. So many children in the audience, really loving it. And again, part of the culture of handball is that you go on the court, you compete really hard, but you shake hands. We actually have a tradition in handball of, which you may have seen when you've watched it, Michael, of players after the game, effectively kind of high-fiving each other from both teams in lines. And, I'm trying to describe that for a listening audience. But the point is that it's built into the culture of handball that everybody, kind of hugs and congratulates each other at the end of every game. And that translates into the wider culture of the sport.
And when we consider this policy, this initiative to target young people and get the game into schools, I went to a rugby school. I played rugby for years and years. I reported on rugby for years and years. I go to lots of rugby matches. I don't know the rules. I still don't know the rules of rugby. I don't understand it. I watch it on the television. Handball, when you watch that, in terms of that getting into young people, it's quite a simple concept. It's quite a simple game, I guess, to pick up, which must be one of the attractions.
Absolutely. At the high end of the sport, there are decisions that are based on the most finite judgments. And again, one thing for your listeners that if they've never watched handball, we all have always had two referees on the court at the same time. So there are two referees, and the referees basically take up positions opposite each other so that every angle is covered, or as much as possible, every angle is covered. And the referees are in contact with each other through headphones, particularly, again, at the kind of highest level of the sport. It makes the decision-making much better, can I just say, but equally, your point about the simplicity of it, the accessibility of handball is incredible. All you need to know is there's 7 players in each team. You have to bounce the ball after 3 steps and pass it or bounce it. And to score a goal, you shoot past a goalkeeper into a net. And you're not allowed to set foot in the goalkeeper's area, much like five-a-side football. So we often describe it to people as, if you know what five-a-side football is, but you pass the ball to hand instead of to feet, and you've got to bounce the ball like you do in basketball. At that really base level, yes, there's lots of intricate, complicated rulings and referee decisions that come in. But, I was sitting next to some of the most experienced people in the world in handball, watching some of the games at the weekend. And, they're going, I don't know why the referee made that decision, but hey, the referee made that decision, and that's, everybody gets behind it. And that, again, is the culture of the sport. But one other point I would make you said you went to a rugby school, so you grew up with rugby. We are deliberately talking to our colleagues across other sports governing bodies, could look to bring handball in as part of their training regime, could use a handball game as part of the development activity, because there's lots of evidence to show that the physical and mental benefits of the way that handball is played is really powerful. It's also really supportive to other sports. So, as I say, a second string to our strategy is to also aim to ensure that we are the sport that other sports play in between.
And Julia, what is the setup then? If you've got a young person that wants to play handball, are there leagues, are there cups, are there teams that people can join? Is there a Scottish national team that is competing in European championships and world championships that people can aspire to be a part of?
Yeah, so in terms of the first kind of steps, if you were a child that was interested in playing handball, we have approximately like 8 to 10 kind of community clubs across the sort of central belt in Scotland, whether it be youth or a kind of senior that has a sort of slightly a youth program. The first kind of steps would be they would be taking part in an after school club that would come through. We have a setup called Active Schools, and we work with them in a lot of local authority areas to give them resource and support to be able to set up these kind of after school clubs, and potentially after school clubs then develop into a youth club. And then if you progress and you want to play for your senior teams, the majority of our youth clubs that we have also have senior sections, and they take part in our national leagues at the moment. We do have a kind of development league for the male side, but on the women's side is less developed at the moment. So we currently just have the one national league that our senior women across Scotland take part in. But we also support the university setup. They have their own leagues within the universities in Scotland. So again, quite a lot of the players go between playing for the university and playing for their community club. We recently rebooted our national team programme. So within handball in Scotland, currently in international competition, you play as Great Britain, and that's the pathway in all international competition, and something that was part of our governing body of the year award. It was mentioned by the judging panel, was that our kind of reboot of the Scottish national team programme, which also has a youth element to it that's been going on for quite a long time. So lots of opportunities to get involved in handball. So if you know of anyone that wants to take part, then there's lots of opportunities for them to get involved.
Well, we're talking to Julia Stenhouse, Operations Manager, and Ewan Hunter, CEO of the Scottish Handball Association, on Great British Bosses from Anything But Footy, the Olympic and Paralympic podcast. I actually wanted to ask you, Ewan, following on from what Julia said, what relationship do you have with British handball, or is actually the Scottish Handball Association leading the way in this country?
So obviously the Scottish Handball Association is the governing body for handball in Scotland. In England, it is England Handball, and our friends at England Handball are doing a brilliant job. So I will give a big shout out to Mike and the team there. There is then a body called the British Handball Association. There are two shareholders in the British Handball Association, Scottish Handball and England Handball. And as Julia said, at international recognition, teams will play as GB. That is as a direct consequence of London 2012. Because there was the opportunity to have a handball team. Handball is a long-standing Olympic sport. We have the European Handball Federation, and then we have the International Handball Federation, much in the way that we have FIFA and UEFA in football. And so Scotland and England both dropped from full members of the European Handball Federation to associate. And that full member status was then given to the British Handball Association. And so there are conversations about Commonwealth Games participation. That is one avenue. Scotland and England work really, really well together. We collaborate on lots of things. Obviously, we do come together then as part of the GB programme. And, Scottish athletes are represented there for sure. But, in conjunction with that, we are actively now growing our own National Academy programme as well.
One of the reasons why we started this podcast, because we do think the British English Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland sporting system is one of the most intriguing sporting systems that anyone would ever come up with. I think if you set it down now and said, well, let's come up with how we structure sport, we wouldn't do it this way. But we are where we are. And Ewan, just on that, British curling, for example, you represent Great Britain at curling at the Olympics, but the teams, Bruce Moe, who we know, of course, plays for Scotland for curling in the European Championships. So it is doable. But it's just for you guys at handball at the moment. It's just it hasn't been agreed, or it's not available.
Yeah, we just structure it differently. I think it would be a really interesting, way to do it. But it's not how British handball has been structured.
So, Ewan, let's talk about 2012 and legacy. We know as a host nation, Team GB were able to enter a British team in handball, in volleyball, in basketball, not sports that traditionally they would obviously have involvement at an Olympic level. Was there a missed opportunity after that with the correct setup, the correct funding, that handball in this country could have gone on? It just seemed a bit strange, a bit upsetting to just dismantle that for those three team sports that I mentioned, for example.
I think there's a much bigger structural conversation, of course, which is exactly what you're alluding to, Michael, around the nature of sports funding. And of course, the idea that you link sports funding to medal outcomes is, on the one hand, understandable, and on the other hand, really not very logical at all, particularly for sports, for our sport, for basketball, for volleyball, other sports where, perhaps a GB representative team does not have the history of success, does not have the culture. So the idea of putting a Team GB together for London 2012 was fantastic, but for its success to be predicated upon medal return was never ever going to have any hope of achieving that kind of aim. It's simply not possible when the culture of handball, it really doesn't or hardly exists. It does exist a little, but it's very, very small, as we've alluded to. On the positive side, London 2012 certainly did have a bounce in terms of people's interest, and it raised the profile. But from a funding point of view, I know from colleagues that unquestionably it did not kind of provide the sustainable pathway that I think with a little bit more thoughtfulness around what we were actually trying to do would have created a lot bigger legacy, actually. Positives, the captain of the GB women's handball team is Lynn McCafferty. She is one of our coaches here in Scotland. She, along with many others, have taken that experience and really used that to help grow and promote and inspire more handball. I think, as you alluded to, in the question, was there ways that could have been done better? I think unquestionably yes. And I think we've been learning a lot of those lessons ever since.
And Julia, when you talk about all those young people that you're introducing to your brilliant sport that was such an attraction in the Copper Box at 2012, it really did capture the public imagination. When my kids watch Wimbledon, they want to go out and hit a tennis ball. When they watch the Olympics, they want to try gymnastics. How important would it be for your young people that you're working with to perhaps have that opportunity to see a British team at an Olympic level again, or a Commonwealth Games level, as you mentioned, as Scotland?
Yeah, I think hugely important to have that visibility, and generally for accessibility of seeing the sport as well. Many people now don't actually appreciate that handball is an Olympic sport because GB doesn't have a team in the current Olympic pathway. That the way that the rights are done through, whichever company gets the rights to show the Olympics, they only have a certain number of sports that they can show. I think that was definitely a talking point from the last Olympics. The actual visibility of the sport as a whole has disappeared since London 2012 because of the absence of the team. But saying that, in terms of our GB setup at the moment, we normally have quite a few. I think probably in the larger term, if you look at how many Scottish players get selected for GB teams, I think that we have quite a big ratio in terms of our Scotland players that end up in current GB squads. They're doing fantastically well at the moment, and we're trying to give them as much coverage as we can, and especially our Scottish players, but the GB teams as a whole, because we're building new audiences, building new channels. Like our TikTok channel, for example, we introduced last year. TikTok handball and TikTok seems to go really well together, so that's something that we're kind of focusing on and trying to giving our Scottish athletes and GB as a whole more airtime. Our GB team, the under-20s, they're off to Costa Rica in March to play in the IHF Intercontinental Trophy, which is a history-making tournament for the youth team of GB. We've got men's seniors who just won their European qualifiers for the men's 2026 EHF tournament. So there's a huge amount going on with GB at the moment, which I think for the majority of the population is behind the scenes, but we're working really, really hard to try and increase that visibility, especially with our new audiences of young people. But until we can get it on terrestrial TV and showing that, then we still have quite a bit to go.
Well, TikTok may be the future, Julia. So how many people will sit down and watch television as we move forward in years to come? We'll wait and see. But it sounds like you're doing the right thing. Well, I've got a couple of more questions before we wrap up, but I can't believe we've been through this podcast and Michael hasn't mentioned he's seen handball. How have we got through this podcast without him mentioning it? Michael, come on, quickly, give us the story.
Olympics 2012, Copper Box. I had tickets for the semi-finals, and the reason I had the tickets for the semi-finals is my best friend and I decided we would go into the ballot and try and get as much as we could, and whatever we got, we would share. He got the men's 100 meters athletics final with Usain Bolt. I got the handball semi-finals. So
you were winning, Michael.
I got the better end of the deal. The footnote to that story is it was also the same night as the men's 200 meters final. So we were able to watch the handball semi-final, and then as we came back out into the park, Usain Bolt was on the big screen, which was kind of the second best place in the world if you weren't in the actual stadium to watch it. So yes, I have seen Olympic handball, and as I said, I mean, it really did capture the imagination during 2012. I also want to talk about snooker before we wrap up, but John.
Yeah, let me ask the question to Julia, and you can ask the snooker question. So Julia, on that, from what you said, getting prominence, the fact that Paris 2024 next year and France are so good at handball, could that actually help?
Yeah, I think definitely. I think, handball is so ingrained into their kind of sporting culture in France. And I think that if people are able to watch, if in the UK it is available to watch, or they're showing more of that on terrestrial television or on BBC iPlayer or Eurosport, whoever gets the contract, I think that'll do huge amounts of good. And I think also with Paris being such a close venue, that hopefully the majority of people who then go and travel for the Olympics, that they have more of an opportunity to see handball, that it's there, that there will be more tickets available for UK viewers to see handball. But we have a fantastic story about one of the schools in Scotland who they went on a school trip down to the 2012 Olympics, and the only thing that they could get tickets for was handball. So there was one teacher and a group, I think about 20 students, aged 12, 13, went down to London 2012 and watched the handball and thought, this is the most fantastic sport we have ever seen. They came straight back to Scotland, started a team, and now they're the biggest youth team here in Scotland through the school. So it's there can be some fantastic stories built through just watching handball for the first time, because it just gets your imagination as soon as you watch it. There's some really brilliant opportunities, I think, with Paris coming up.
It would be good if we could, in this country, just open our eyes sometimes when we are talking about the Olympics and look at some other Olympic sports. We don't talk about football on this podcast, but being in Rio, Michael and I were in Rio, and one of our Olympic moments was going to the Maracanã
and watching Neymar score a goal for Brazil, and the coverage that you got caught up in the football because you were in Rio. So I think what you're saying, Julia, is right. If we can be in France and there's lots of handball coverage and fans get to see it and you get a bit more coverage of it, but wouldn't it be nice just sometimes if we just showed some other sports that actually were world class and weren't just all about being Great Britain? I'll get off my soapbox and I'll let Michael ask the last question.
Yeah, so Ewan, you were a professional snooker player for 3.5 years before you obviously entered the world of handball. I mean, just reflect on that period of your life for us, and finally wrap up by how near or far are we to seeing British, Scottish handball players back at an Olympic Games?
Okay, thank you. 10 out of 10 for your research, Michael.
It's way down the bottom of your LinkedIn profile, by the way.
It really is.
You have to do a lot of
is.
scrolling to get there.
There's people that I have known for years that have never gone that far down my LinkedIn profile. So well done. You know, I did a degree in Scottish history at Glasgow University, and then, as you do, I became a professional snooker player. I had grown up playing snooker, and the sport opened up back in the kind of mid-90s, and you know, I had to go. But I was fortunate in being able to practice and work alongside effectively the very best in the world. I mean, I was practicing with John Higgins. John Higgins at the time was world number one, UK champion, world champion. He held virtually every single, you know, notable crown going, and he and I are spending a day practicing together. And it comes back to that sort of slightly wider point of seeing success. And as Julia indicated earlier, the importance of that visibility of sport. If I can see it, I can be it. The importance of being able to see that success and see it represented in front of you is just incredibly powerful. So while Scotland had a guy before Stephen Hendry was called Murdo MacLeod. He was actually my first ever coach. And then Stephen Hendry, of course, burst onto the scene, arguably the greatest player ever to pick up a cue, maybe Ronnie, probably in terms of natural ability. And I was really fortunate in reflecting on all of that experience to have been around that era. So my era in snooker was Ronnie O'Sullivan, John Higgins, Alan McManus, Stephen Hendry, and many other players you've never heard of. We hear a lot about the taking of lessons from sport into business, but very often I think that is perhaps not articulated as clearly as it might be. Certainly from my point of view, one of the things that I really learned from sport was that resilience and the mental toughness. Especially in a kind of single sport like snooker, where you know it's you on the table. You don't have 10 teammates or 6 teammates, right? Or 14 teammates. You've got you. You may have people in your corner. You may have a support network there, but nonetheless, it's you on the table. And much like I guess Andy Murray or other sports like tennis, where you're that individual person, or golf perhaps less so. You've got a caddy who is actually with you on the course. But as I say, from my point of view, learning that resilience and that ability to get back up, frankly, is one of the things that often is not talked about enough. So I certainly have done. In my business experience is now 25 years. I've run businesses across Scotland and further afield, so to have the opportunity to bring all of that together with this post in handball is fantastic. And we will continue to try to make sure that the visibility of our sport and the culture that we're trying to grow is embedded, so that we not only provide inspiration and opportunity for those players to represent both Scotland and GB as it stands in Olympics and perhaps Commonwealth Games in future, but so that young people today can turn around and say, well, I could see it, so that's what I could be.
Well, Ewan Hunter, CEO of Scottish Handball Association, and Julia Stenhouse, the operations manager of of the Sports Governing Body of the Year 2022. Thank you very much for joining Great British Bosses from Anything But Footy.
Thank you.
Sports Social Podcast Network.
Lucky Land Casino, asking people, what's the weirdest place you've gotten lucky?
Lucky? In line at the deli, I guess?
Aha, in my dentist's office. More than once, actually.
Do I have to say?
Yes, you do.
In the car before my kids' PTA meeting.
Really?
Yes.
Excuse me, what's the weirdest place you've gotten lucky?
I never win and tell.
Well, there you have it. You can get lucky anywhere, playing at LuckyLandSlots.com. Play for free right now. Are you feeling lucky? No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. 18+. Terms and conditions apply. See website for details.